So you know how in the last video, link in the description, we were talking about being responsible gamers and challenging ourselves and our intellect when picking new games? Forget about all that for a second. And look at this custom-tailored nostalgia bait that was made just for me. We're going to cover pretty much everything Farever has to offer in this early state of the game. But first, a story. Were you ever 13 years old? I know I was, and I don't remember most of it. But one thing I do remember is coming home from school and doing my homework so that I could begin my second job, or really my first job, as an anime character in an MMO game called Fly for Fun, or Flife. So if you're 20 or 30 something and have been gaming since you were a kid, you probably have a similar game in mind. And if you were really lucky and had cool parents, that game might have been World of Warcraft, but probably it was RuneScape or something. Farever is a game that is constantly auto-corrected when trying to type it, but it is also a game that pays homage to these old grindfest second job MMOs in honestly the best possible way. It's like it's distilled all that pre-9/11, pre-COVID, early 2000s nostalgic goodness of fighting with your sibling over the computer because they want to, play flash games and you want to play a real game, a real man's game. So they bottled all of that to be directly injected into your veins, and they take out all the bad parts, most notably the absurd amount of time investment that you would have needed to make any decent headway in those games at all. This is everything Farever, all of the time. Working title. Come with me, won't you, while I overanalyze everything about this game to the point of making it not fun. First, the game actually feels really fun to play. Farever features a good combat system that I like, much better than the click and wait, press the right hotbar button in the right order, tab targeting style of design featured in games like Fly for Fun or World of Warcraft. There's dodging and blocking and dashing and countering and bashing. Did I say bashing already? It's just a really fun time. You have 4 classes right out the gate. I'd say they're distinct, but we'll get to that. You got your warrior, your rogue, your mage, and a priest, with more to come according to the current roadmap, which I will include on the screen for you now. They have monk and druid on the way for classes, so that's pretty cool. Now, each class has its own little intricacies. They all have innate abilities that you can modify using runes that you find while playing to alter your play style a little bit. Warrior gets a slam, a charge, a shout, and a self buff. Their gimmick is rage. So you do more attacks, you get rage, and then you can go stomping boy style on guys with your special ability. And your rogue's also pretty standard. You get a shadow step, you get a smoke screen, you get a mark ability, and you get a Beyblade. And they have a build and spend type of thing going on. Now, mages have a blink, a shield, a beam, and a cooldown reset, and they also have a build and spend type thing going on. That's a different flavor. And priests have heals, buffs, and AoE stuff, and they have a customizable burst attack that can do different things depending on how you set it up. Weapons are locked to certain classes, but you could have a sword that could be used by both a priest and a warrior, for example, and all of the weapons all have their own set of additional skills. And there's already actually a lot of weapons in the game, which is super nice. So you have your character abilities from your class, you have your weapon abilities, and then you also have your, little modifiers that you can pick up. Finally, characters all have their own talent trees that allow you to customize your character even further. Frankly, the amount of options here is pretty robust. It's not like Path of Exile or anything, but it is extremely approachable and very casual. It's totally possible to do pretty well without paying too much mind to your build. Between the class skills, weapon skills, and talent trees, there's actually kind of a huge amount of diversity and experimentation. The scope of the game punches way above standard. Spatially, the map is huge. It's a huge landscape with varying levels of height and depth, complete with different vibes. You'll be platforming up tall mountains, and spelunking through caves, and even doing a little underwater stuff. The map is littered with these little challenges, from special combat encounters to token collection to other token collection to yet another token collection. It's 3 tokens. So in that way, it kind of lends itself to a sort of like, it kind of reminds you of Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie in a way, because there's all this stuff around that you can get, and the collecting and It's not as deep as those games, but, it's nice. You also got like 6 or 7 jobs that you can do. This game has jobs that will have you gathering resources and crafting weapons for armor, jewelry, potions, and food and stuff. And you'd think that this would have you kind of postponing the actual game to collect flowers and stuff, but it doesn't really play out that way. You don't need all that many unless you want them, but it's pretty easy to get a bunch of resources. This game is incredibly casual compared to its MMO counterparts, which actually, while we're on the subject, this isn't actually an MMO. It's what you would call an MMO-Lite, meaning you got different shards that players all connect to, different servers, and each one of these different shards holds like 20 or so players. And surprisingly, I never found that this led to a lacking experience for me personally. Actually, I was kind of thankful that I didn't have to like wait in line to target farm a mob or like wait in, fight somebody over a resource node or something like that. Now, if you're like, a classic WoW player and you want more than 20 or so players to play with at a time, there is talk of raising this player cap, so there's some good news for you. And another thing, this game is hugely soloable. There's not much content that is gated to groups, with the exception being some harder dungeon bosses. And some of them are perfectly soloable, but others I found my warrior had a really hard time or an impossible time overcoming them. Maybe that's a personal failing on my part, and I can accept that, but I digress. The only thing I found really lacking when it comes to the scope of this game was that there's a lot of like recolored and renamed enemies in some areas. Even the areas themselves are recycled, meaning like they put a bunch of different little activities in them for you to do. So you kind of have to spend more time in that area than you would otherwise. But apparently more enemies and areas are on the way, which is welcome. Now, you really don't have to do much thinking when playing this game, which for me was a nice break from the last game I played. Link in the description. Sometimes you just want to crash stuff and not think too hard about it. This is a perfect podcast game. Like, you can throw something on the second monitor, target farm some mobs and explore for treasure and do a raid. Really tropey, comfortable MMO stuff. Your enemies will chase you and attack you in a couple of predictable patterns. Like you got a big red circle will appear on the ground, or like a half circle might appear on the ground, and you got to not be there when that happens. Some more enemy behaviors would really be appreciated here, and we do get that in the form of raid bosses that have different phases and stuff. But for the most part, you're going to be cycling your cooldowns and feeling pretty badass while doing it. And there's not really any significant lore or anything. Lots of characters and places are literally just puns. There's the Mines of Estroni and characters with names like S. Pilgrim or H. Ketchum, which personally I appreciated. What I'm trying to say is the game plays like comfort food. It's like eating a warm bowl of like really good mac and cheese. There could be, you would probably appreciate some like braised beef in that mac and cheese, like from Noodles and Company or whatever. But it doesn't have that. You made it at home. But it's comfortable. It's not particularly healthy, but it's comforting. Now, what is the driving factor of this game? Why should you choose to play it? Well, this game is very much a slow dopamine trip, but it's not as nefarious as something with like FOMO Battle Pass type stuff, and hopefully it stays that way. They do have a cash shop that will probably have some stuff in it at some point, but right now all that's in there is the early access stuff, and that might have changed with the most recent update. Now, it wasn't very often that I encountered a wall or a quit moment or really any friction at all in this game. Typically, you're punching down mobs that are several levels higher than you, like no problem. And if something starts giving you a problem, you can very easily just go do anything else and come back after like an upgrade or two, and then you'll just steamroll them. Now, you want to get your motivation for playing is to get the build you want, to see that big level up light, and then to enjoy the spoils of your victories. And then it's done, unless you want to try another class, which you could do. You could do that. Now me, I played a little bit of everything just for you. But I took my warrior all the way to level 20, and I spent most of my time doing that. To my dismay, they don't have a giant two-handed greatsword, which made the game practically unplayable for me. I don't know what it is about games not wanting to put like too many swords in their games. If you're a Path of Exile 2 guy, maybe you'll understand the sword shortage that we're having in fantasy games, but I digress. I started off with the old sword and board, and then I found myself a big-ass axe with a huge, like, big AoE slam that I could kill, like, 20 guys with at the same time. It was okay. And then I gained most of my levels, in my opinion, really quickly by just, like, target farming high-density mob areas with the big-ass axe. And there is quests you could do for XP and stuff, but honestly, this just felt faster. And perhaps that's by design, but I'm not super sure because I didn't spend too much time doing the quests, because most of them are like, hey, kill 8 of this thing, which you're doing anyway. Find 8 of this enemy, which you're doing anyway, and then like give me 5 things. You know, they're not particularly exciting. So, but instead of doing that, I chose the tried and true method of my ancestors, which was finding a spot where the mob density was just high enough and putting on a 2-hour video essay about all the different types of stormtroopers in Star Wars and turning my brain completely off. Now, there is a specific primal comfort in establishing a rotation loop around a single hill, waiting for the exact same 5 guys to respawn and then killing them all at once. If you played Fly for Fun or any of the other grindy MMOs, you know exactly the kind of disease that I'm talking about. You know, you just park yourself in an area, become the apex predator of that particular patch of grass for the next hour or so, and watch that little XP bar tick across your screen, which is not particularly fun, but it does scratch a certain kind of itch in the low brain, you know, in the reptile brain. And honestly, there is something really nice about that. In psychology, you have a concept known as the id. That's your foundational instinctual part of your subconscious that just wants immediate pleasure and uncomplicated gratification. In our day-to-day adult lives, we're constantly exhausting ourselves to navigate complex social expectations and high-stakes responsibilities. Hell, you're probably doing this also if you're a teenager in school. So when you find out that Farever is actually populated mostly by like working adults, it makes sense. The game acts as a gentle, low-stakes sanctuary. By lowering the threat of failure and removing the burden of heavy, stressful choices, it gives your brain a chance to step off the treadmill of modern life and just breathe for a second. It's a nice little vacation for your consciousness, wrapped in a cozy blanket of nostalgia. And you have a bowl of mac and cheese. But this cozy design choice creates a really fascinating paradox when it comes to the multiplayer side of things. Historically, old school MMO grinds were fueled by a massive server-wide community. You mined ore for hours because it directly impacted a huge virtual economy. But because Farever uses 20-player shards to keep your gameplay experience peaceful and prevent players from fighting over resources, and probably because of budget constraints, it shifts the weight of that community onto your immediate social circle. So you'll hear people say like, oh, this game is so much more fun with friends, and that's true. Everything is more fun with friends. But it highlights an interesting tightrope that the developers are walking, because they want this to be an easily casual, soloable experience, but they also want it to be a group-focused thing. And having both is going to be really hard, because you want the depth from having a well-rounded party. You want to have, like, oh, we can't do this dungeon until we get a healer, because we need a healer to heal us for this particular phase of the dungeon or whatever. Because that makes for interesting gameplay. But if you also want your game to be soloable, that means that you're locking solo players out of that content. So, you know, so that's what I think will be the real challenge for Farever as it grows in early access. Because it does want to do a couple things at once. It wants to be super casual. It wants to be soloable. It wants to, you know, have different classes and different ways to build your character and different character customizations. But like, It's kind of right now it's kind of simultaneously a group game and a like a podcast game where you can unwind after a long shift, and a cooperative dungeon crawler that encourages you to team up and tackle challenges together. But right now, those two designs occasionally bump heads. So, like, when a solo player suddenly hits a massive mechanics wall in a dungeon that they can't beat by themselves. And then there's also the character customization too. Like right now, even though the talent trees and runes seem incredibly robust, the ultra casual nature of the game means that you can play almost just as well without specking into any hyper specific role. I mean, honestly, you could probably even distribute your stats randomly and still do just as good, or probably not as good, but you could still, you know, do the content. And it's for that reason that the character archetypes, the classes, don't really feel entirely distinct yet, because you rarely enter a dungeon and need a dedicated like healer or dedicated tank to round out your squad. And while that keeps the game approachable, it can make all upgrades feel extremely arbitrary. And it robs the multiplayer of any kind of deep cooperative synergy that could happen that made the old school MMOs so legendary. And the combat moves they unlock at like this slow, deliberate pace, and it forces the game to rely heavily on that slow, nostalgic dopamine drip for motivation rather than just the raw satisfaction of moment to moment tactical gameplay. And once you've fully leveled a character, learned your optimal skill rotation, and have seen what the world has to offer, leveling a second character can lose a bit of its luster because the mechanical variety just is not there. But if the team at Shiro Games can bridge that gap, deepening the identity of these classes and giving solo players the tools they need to thrive while continuing to foster the tight knit party moments, they might just capture lightning in a bottle. It's proof that you don't really need overwhelming, hyper predatory live service models to make something that people want to come home to. But that's pretty much all I have for Forever. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.